In the stifling midsummer heat of July 1518, a woman stepped out of her timber-framed home onto a narrow cobblestone street in the free imperial city of Strasbourg. Without a word and with no music playing, she began to dance. Her movements were not joyful. They were erratic, jerky, and repetitive. Her husband pleaded with her to stop, but she continued through the day and into the night, pausing only when she collapsed from sheer exhaustion. As dawn broke, she stood up and began again. Within a week, her solitary torment had spread. Over 30 citizens had joined her, their limbs twitching in a shared, silent rhythm. This was the opening spark of what would become one of the most bizarre and tragic crises in urban history, the Strasbourg dancing plague. To understand why this occurred, we must look beyond modern assumptions of medieval ignorance. The catastrophe that followed was not caused by a neglect of science, but by a desperate, highly organized attempt to apply the cutting-edge medical theory of the 16th century. When the city's rulers tried to cure a psychological breakdown with state-sponsored music and physical exertion, they inadvertently built the world's first lethal, state-sanctioned rave. Strasbourg in 1518 was a self-governing city of the Holy Roman Empire, dominated by its towering cathedral spire, then the tallest structure in the world. But beneath this architectural marvel lay a population pushed to its absolute limits. Years of extreme, unpredictable weather had ruined successive harvests, causing severe famine and hyperinflation. Diseases like smallpox and the terrifying, newly arrived syphilis ravaged the crowded alleys. It was in this climate of extreme, inescapable stress that the dancing contagion multiplied. Terrified by the growing number of afflicted citizens, Strasbourg's ruling body, the Council of 21, intervened. Crucially, they did not immediately appeal to religion. Instead, they did what any modern municipal government would do. They consulted their chief guild physicians. These doctors operated under the dominant medical framework of their era, Galenic humoral medicine. According to Galen, human health was governed by 4 vital fluids, or humors. The physicians diagnosed the dancers as suffering from an excess of hot blood. The prescribed cure was entirely logical within this medical system. The afflicted had to sweat out the corrupted blood. To stop them, the doctors warned, would cause their internal organs to overheat and fail. The dancers had to keep moving. Taking this expert medical advice literally, the Council of 21 mobilized the city's infrastructure. They cleared out the central grain market and 2 prominent guild halls to give the dancers room. Opposite the busy horse market, carpenters erected a massive wooden stage. To keep the physical momentum going, the city hired professional musicians. Pipers, drummers, and horn players were paid from the municipal ledger, an expense of 2 florins, specifically recorded in surviving archives, to provide a continuous high-tempo rhythm. The council even hired robust local strongmen and professional dancers to hold up the collapsing, sleep-deprived victims, forcing their trembling limbs to keep time with the music. But the council's intervention had a catastrophic psychological effect. The lively public atmosphere and the driving rhythmic beat of the tabor drums acted as a massive psychological trigger. Rather than sweating out the illness, onlookers who were already traumatized by famine and disease were drawn into the trance. The crowd of active dancers swelled from dozens to an estimated 400 people. The sensory environment was overwhelming. The shrill scream of wooden pipes, the deep thump of drums, and the stench of sweat and blood. Many dancers' shoes wore away, leaving their bare feet bleeding onto the wooden stage, yet they continued to jump and twist, weeping and praying for a strength they no longer possessed. For centuries, historians and scientists have debated what truly triggered this collective mania. 3 main theories dominate the historical discourse. The first is ergotism, or St. Anthony's fire, a form of food poisoning caused by the toxic mold Claviceps purpurea, which grows on damp rye, the staple grain of the Alsatian poor. While ergot contains psychoactive compounds capable of causing hallucinations and spasms, it also restricts blood flow to the extremities, causing a burning sensation and eventually gangrene. It is physiologically impossible for individuals suffering from severe ergotism to dance continuously for days on end. A second theory suggests the dancers belonged to an apocalyptic, heretical cult traveling the Rhine. However, contemporary eyewitness accounts consistently record that the victims were not willing participants. They were in deep distress, crying out in agony and begging to stop. This leaves the third, most widely accepted explanation: mass psychogenic illness, or conversion disorder. Under extreme, unendurable psychological stress, the human mind can disassociate. Because the local population harbored a deep, superstitious fear of St. Vitus, a Christian martyr believed to punish sinners by forcing them to dance, their collective trauma manifested physically in the exact shape of their cultural fears. By late August 1518, the Council of 21 realized their medical experiment had backfired spectacularly. Dozens of citizens were collapsing from exhaustion, dehydration, strokes, and heart attacks. Horrified by the mounting casualties, the council enacted a sudden, drastic policy reversal. They tore down the wooden stages, dismissed the hired musicians, and banned all public dancing. Stringed instruments were permitted only at private weddings, while percussion instruments like drums and tambourines, now recognized as triggers for the mania, were strictly outlawed. The city then pivoted from a secular medical cure to a spiritual one. The worst afflicted dancers were bundled into heavy wooden wagons and transported 25 miles northwest to the sandstone cliffs of Saverne. Here, in a damp grotto dedicated to St. Vitus, priests performed mass and sprinkled the dancers with holy water. Crucially, the victims were fitted with specialized red leather shoes, which had small wooden crosses painted onto the soles and uppers with consecrated oil. Within weeks of this structured religious ritual, the mass psychogenic trance finally broke. The twitching stopped, the exhausted survivors returned to their homes, and the epidemic subsided. When examining the Strasbourg dancing plague, popular history often relies on exaggerated accounts written decades after the event. For instance, the famous claim that 15 people died per day appears only in late 16th century chronicles and is unsupported by any contemporary 1518 municipal or church records. Even the name Frau Troffea was first recorded years later by the alchemist Paracelsus during his research visit in 1526. Yet the core of the event remains fully documented in Strasbourg's archives. It stands as a stark historical warning. In times of collective trauma, a society's attempt to engineer a cure using the best available science can, if misapplied, become the very engine of its destruction.